Eve, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where in the world you might be watching this from. My name is Ciara O'Halloran and I'm a 2019 Nuffield Scholar. My topic was on food tourism and its potential to be used as an educational tool to shorten the gap between the consumer and the producer. So why this topic? Ireland is renowned for its quality and produce in its agri-food and drink export industry. It's also renowned as a destination for people to come and experience the scenery, the people, the culture and the crack. So what happens when both of these industries combine? For us, 5 years ago, we were a business that was involved in 100% export of live seafood, primarily oysters. The Irish oyster industry has changed somewhat in more recent years, with farms and businesses branding their oysters, pinpointing their bay of origin, feeding into the provenance story and in turn increasing in their value. In a report by Bordbia, the Irish oyster industry grew between 2014 and 2018 from 60% to 60% in value, but only 29% in production. Another area that has also been growing has been the area of food tourism and food trails and farm tours. This has been backed by Ireland's tourism agency, Fáilte Ireland, in their food and drink strategy, as well as a number of tour companies looking for unique experiences to pass on to their visitors and guests, food and drink related, as well as a consumer demand through platforms such as Airbnb Experiences, TripAdvisor or Viator.com. It was through this that I started looking at diversifying our business and welcoming visitors into the tours and teaching about oysters. So what is food tourism? Well, it depended on who you asked. It can be an umbrella term used to describe gastrotourism, culinary tourism, agritourism or pescatourism. It can be used to describe farmers markets, food trails, farm to fork events. It can be used to describe long table events. But for the purpose of this research, I primarily focused on experiences in food tourism. I visited large scale ones, smaller niche experiences, and I tried to look at experiences that had an educational aspect. One such experience was Hooker Prawn Park in Taupo in New Zealand. This is on the larger scale. They welcome 75,000 visitors a year. And you can do an educational piece to a half-an-hour tour of the hatchery and nursery to learn how these Malaysian warm water prawns are produced and bred, before also being taught how to fish for them and being led into a water-themed park where there's ponds with both prawns and trout that you can fish for your lunch or your dinner and bring it to one of the many barbecue huts or the restaurant that seats 400 people. It was on the larger scale, and when you're done with fishing and the food-related stuff, you can participate in nature trails. Very often, the larger and self-guided tourism offerings, tourism was our main source of revenue. They required capital investment, and the education around the food was generally secondary to the experiences or the entertainment. On the other scale was the niche experiences, and one such one that I visited was Island Creek Oysters in Duxbury, Massachusetts. Island Creek supply restaurants and direct-to-consumer all across the US, and they started with farm tours about 8 years ago. And as their business has grown, so has their farm tour offering. You can now do a half-an-hour tour of their hatchery to learn all about how oysters are bred, as well as scallops, before going out and around the farm and tasting oysters at source. What's unique about Island Creek Oysters is that they have also converted their courtyard into a raw oyster bar, creating a destination for visitors to come from all over to experience oysters. Their experience last year welcomed over 4,000 visitors. And generally what I found with niche experiences was that they were added on to an existing business. You could offer it as a more premium price, and very often they were grown organically over time, requiring less capital investment. The owner was generally the host, and if they weren't the host, there's another marketable product there in the form of a VIP tour. They were a direct line of communication between the producer and the consumer. When talking to Island Creek, one of the things and one of the areas they were looking at and hoping to expand on and further develop was in the area of collaboration with other farm experiences along the coast. And this is something that Ireland has done quite well. We've become quite well established for our food trails, both older existing ones and newer ones. And one of the new ones that's coming on board is Tasty Atlantic. This has been a collaboration between Ireland's Seafood Development Agency, BIM, as well as Fáilte Ireland, their tourism agency. It encompasses 22 aquaculture producers along the Atlantic coast, both oyster farmers, mussel farmers, smoked salmon producers, as well as abalone farmers. The main purpose of this is around education and promotion of aquaculture and provenance. and indeed playing into sustainability of the industry. However, a challenge with this food trail, as well as all food trails, is a conversion of getting it from a listing of food producers to a food trail. Consumers need a bookable experience. They need to know about it before they arrive at the destination. And for this, very often they require social proofing in the form of reviews. All of this leads into generating income for the hosts and creating more buy-in to create more authentic experiences. Ian Yeoman highlighted that tomorrow's tourist wants dynamic, escapist experiences, but at the same time, social responsibility and authenticity. Through meeting many tourism bodies, tour companies, hosts of niche experiences, as well as our own experience, there has been a number of benefits to stakeholders that have constantly come up. From the host and producer perspective, cash flow. There's no 30 days or 60 days waiting to be paid. The payments generally for experiences in tourism are paid upfront, if not on the day. It places a value on the knowledge and the experience and your story, and not just your product. And it opens up channels to direct-to-consumer markets. And these markets are opened up because for the consumer, there is now an emotional connection between the product and the producer. They now can experience a way of herding sheep, producing cheese, roasting coffee, or shucking oysters. And they are privileged to get a behind-the-scenes take on a working business, ultimately giving bragging rights for stories to tell around a table to friends and family. And from an industry perspective, experiences in food tourism close that gap between production and consumption. It provides a platform for the older generation to pass on their cultural and technical experience and knowledge. And ultimately, the industry gains recognition. It is these benefits that I believe play into the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And with 2022 being the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture, it is important to support these diversifications, because it was with these diversifications that they become income generating for rural communities, rural families and rural businesses on both a local and international development context. Along many of my Nuffield travels, it very often came up in conversation about the disconnect between consumer and producer. I believe food tourism, and in particular experiences in food tourism, act as a solution to this. They act as a mechanism and a platform to bring that connection closer together. They also act as a viable alternative to scaling production, to counteract limitations in stock due to environmental impacts, or to bring income generate during the off-season. I would like to conclude with 2020 has been a year like no other. And as I wrote this report, the international tourism industry was being decimated, while countries were required to look at domestic tourism and staycations instead of international tourism. Despite all of this, things will change again. And I believe that there's not only hope for food tourism, but a future in it. And in particular in the small niche experiences. It is these small niche experiences with smaller numbers that give comfort to the consumer or to the visitor. And at a more premium price, give viability and comfort to the host. Ireland should focus on these, but there needs to be regulation. Currently, it's in an unregulated area and anyone can set up an experience in food tourism. And if it's good, it'll have a great impact on the industry. And if it's bad, it has the potential to have a negative. There is need for regulation through a framework like that's done in Scotland, or a code of best practice that the Burn Food Trail participates in, licensing like in Italy, or a quality assurance mark that's already done in our hospitality industry in both hotels and restaurants. By ensuring quality and by having a framework or a regulation of some sort, it ensures quality to the consumer, the host and the industry. And in order for all of this to happen, stakeholders in the food and drink industry, as well as the tourism industry, need to continue to collaborate to promote food tourism as a valuable way to connect the producer and the consumer, and to help place the value on the food here at home, as well as on the export markets, and in return, supporting local communities. Finally, I would like to thank all our sponsors, and in particularly Board Isquiwara Ireland Seafood Development Agency. This has been a wonderful opportunity to bring the connection between land and sea a little bit closer together, and one I look forward to seeing flourishing in the coming years. I would like to pay huge thanks to Nuffield Ireland, to all my friends and family for listening to me, as well as my fellow Nuffield scholars, to which I'm really glad that I can categorise now in both friends and family. And finally to my father, for keeping the ship afloat while I was off doing my gallivanting and listening with enthusiasm with all my great ideas on my return. Have a wonderful day. Slán go fóill.